Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Healing Doesn't Have to Be Heavy podcast. I'm Angie Barrett, and I'm a trauma-informed coach. I'm a play expert. I'm a registered nurse, and I'm also a child abuse survivor. As I was on my healing journey, working to release the trauma of my childhood, I just felt like things were so heavy and so painful, and I didn't see much hope or much light along the way. And then I found play and movement. And as I started to play and as I started to move, the trauma just released from my body. And I started to find hope and lightness and joy and fun in the journey along with the pain. And so now I coach women how to use movement and play to connect to their bodies, releasing limiting self beliefs, stress, anxiety, tension, depression, and trauma. And on this podcast, I'm bringing on experts to share their stories, to share their knowledge and their wisdom and their light and hope and opportunities to help you find those nuggets of peace or joy or happiness along the way. And I have an amazing guest for you today. I'm so excited to share her with you all. But before I do, I just want to give a disclaimer. We're going to be talking about mental health. We're going to be talking about struggles and stress response. So if you find that you're starting to get triggered in any way, definitely please step back, ground down into yourself, do what you need to do in order to come back. And then I invite you to come back and listen to the rest of the podcast when you feel ready and able, because our guest today is amazing. She's got some amazing insights and some really incredible resources. And she might just be that spark that you need to find what is going to work for you to unlock your healing journey. So I invite you to come back when you're ready and take care of yourself along the way. So with that, let me introduce you to today's guest. So I have Estefana Johnson with me today. Hi, how are you? And
Hi,
welcome.
thank you for having me, Angie.
Thank you so much for being here. So tell us about you. Tell us about your journey, what you do. Tell us all about you.
I'm just a human, I'm a mom, I'm a
Love it.
wife, a human on this journey trying to figure things out. I work in mental health, and I think being, first generation Mexican American had its own challenges. I had a lot of adversity growing up. But if you had asked me what I was going to be when I grew up, I never would have said therapist. So it's been an interesting journey into what got me here. But I think because of that, as I got into the field and I learned that I really just was passionate about working with kids at first and helping people who had been through adversity. I think just feeling misunderstood and a misfit.
Mm.
My entire childhood is really what elicits that passion, that compassion for others who are in those situations. And that just goes well for trauma therapy. Doing this work I think, is something that you need in order to not get burned out, something that drives you within, that makes you look at things differently. And so, I started out working with kids, at-risk youth, in residential. After a few years, I realized, I got my master's and became a therapist, and I was really looking for other tools that to better understand why what we were being taught that should work
Hmm.
didn't seem to always work with the type of kids that I worked with, which were they were adjudicated of offenses. They were often in DCS custody, often had already been removed from their parents. And it just seemed like some of the tools that we got, some of the evidence-based things that we were supposed to do didn't quite match what was happening with these kids. And so that kind of threw me on this journey to better understand how these experiences, especially with trauma, impact individuals on their journey, on their identity, their sense of self, and how they interact with the world and how they respond to things. And here I am, still, exploring and still discovering. And, it's been quite a journey.
That's amazing. So, really quickly, for anybody that's listening that maybe doesn't know what adjudicated means, it means convicted of, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Kids are adjudicated, adults are convicted. So they're found guilty of crimes, significant crimes where they go to jail. So most of the kids pretty much all the kids that I treated were on probation or had spent time in jail or were looking at long sentences if they did not complete like court ordered treatment. And it was a locked facility. So they were not out in the community. They had to be in a locked facility. So pretty high risk kids.
And as we were talking earlier, generally kids who are adjudicated of serious crimes at that age have had some sort of significant trauma and have been taught those behaviors because generally, without having some sort of underlying trauma, children don't oftentimes get into such violent crimes. I'm assuming, correct? That's my understanding.
Yeah, I think, especially the population that I worked with who tend to have sexual behavior problems, there was this misnomer that, oh, they must have been victimized themselves. Like 32% had been victimized. The majority, the one common factor was neglect.
Yeah.
And neglect is a lack of connection. To me, I think that's the most complex trauma because that is what causes trauma. You can
Mm-hmm.
go through an adverse event, but if you feel alone, isolated, abandoned, that's when it really causes some damage. It's not the event itself, but your experience of it. And so it doesn't surprise me that when they are neglected, there's no adults that are connected to them. They're not connected to themselves. They don't feel safe. And then you add anything that they go through in life, it's going to be overwhelming. They're going to look for alleviation, come across ideas, and bingo, there's your recipe.
I'm not going to lie, I think it's also the same for adults. We may not act out necessarily in violent ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is a common trauma response. I did that for years with numbing out, with food or controlling food or
Yes.
watching TV, so we all have those ways that we find to express that trauma when we don't have that connection.
Well, what's interesting, I was very grateful to have started my career working with kids because after 15 years of that, when I finally made the jump over, I don't work with kids anymore. I work with the adults because I find if I can help the parents, it's going to make more impact than
Mm.
just trying to treat the kid and then the parent holds the same environment, right? And so when I started working with adults, I'm like, they're just untreated kids, just,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, doing the same thing, but now you're 50, just a little older, like, yeah.
And you have a little more kind of almost wide reaching impact because you're impacting the people that you work with, your kids, your other
Yes,
family
yeah.
members. So, yeah.
And a little bit crustier around the habits, a little harder to like change them than whenever you're younger, more rigid. Yeah.
Oh, yes, 100% harder to change. So,
Yeah.
okay, so you do CMI, which is critical memory integration. Tell us what that is. Tell us about that and how that evolved.
Absolutely. I think I could start from the beginning because it
Yeah.
was, there was always, I felt like there was always something missing. There's so many amazing modalities out there, approaches that therapists use to help people. One thing about our field is we're very big on research. And if just to simplify the way research works, is you find this thing that works, right? You do A, B, C, and it seems to work. Now, to put it into research, you have to pick like a very specific population that you're going to do this with, right? So we're doing some psychedelic studies at the organization that I work for right now. And for the screenings, there's like 6 screenings that people have to go through. So you can have 15 people apply and only one gets through into the research study,
Mhm.
right? So yes, though that one out of 15 or 10 or however much it is that got into the study, it proves this thing works, right? There's some like, and it doesn't mean 100%, as long as there's improvement. And that's great. We have to have some way of measuring it. The problem is now you give me this thing that worked with this specific population that didn't have the complexities that these other 14 people had. And I miss the fact that when I use it with this one over here, it actually is going to be the opposite, right? So
Mhm.
think about like a medication. Yes, like bananas are great for you, but if you're allergic, no, they can kill you. It's
Yeah.
everybody's different. And so when we in our field, if we stick to this, that's when we have the chance of doing more harm. We need to be informed by this, but recognize when these things might not be what the client needs,
Mhm.
right? So as a therapist, here's one evidence-based thing, and I'm like, well, that didn't work with these ones, so now I got to go train in this, and it's thousands of dollars to get, certified in multiple modalities, but also there was like nothing that would tell me that would help me better understand why is it that this works? What are the things that I can look for that lets me know this person needs that one, but this individual needs to start over here? It was
Mhm.
like I was looking for a pattern that would kind of help me better, um, understand and be more efficient, or maybe tuned into the client to know what they need. And so like when I first was in the field, I was learning one approach with kids that was like trauma-focused CBT, which is a cognitive approach, right? They talk about things and they share their story and they have to write it out. Well, I had a couple kids that did great with it, but then I had a couple that did not because they had horrific stuff. So when we start, I see this poor kid, his blood pressure would shoot up to like, you know, ridiculous amount. Heart rate is like at 150, 165. I'm like, this kid's gonna have a heart attack at 12. Like, this is not okay. But that was what I was told that you had to do.
Mhm.
So that was kind of what that desperation of like, it just feels like humanly wrong, right? As a human to human, it
Mhm.
feels wrong. And that I think was a huge catalyst that, threw me into this searching for something different, a different approach or a better way of understanding. And then I found a modality that uses like eye movements, targets images, and it was fantastic. I fell in love because I saw amazing transformations, but even that had its limitations over time. And when I would ask questions, it was back, well, you got to do it this way or else it's not going to work. It has to be this way. It didn't match, right? The experience. And again, I'm like, here we are. Our fidelity is focused on an intervention and not the individual. And I'm like what they call a humanistic therapist, humanistic approach, meaning like I believe that each individual has wisdom within themselves and the capacity, right? They are the expert of their own life. And
Mhm.
that's what I wanted to promote. And so, luckily I had this opportunity to join other like-minded individuals, other clinicians who were seeing the same thing. And we took everything that we had learned through the different modalities that we'd been trained in, all of them effective with, certain things, and wanted to kind of find the pattern of what is the mode, like what is it about this that makes it effective? What is the theory behind these things? And how does that connect with what science tells us about emotions, about memory, about how people develop a sense of self, and kind of overlay it, right? And um, then how do we take all of that and turn it into an approach that helps the clinician better connect with the client, that helps the client better understand themselves and work through whatever experiences they had in the way their body wants to heal, rather than try to force what we think they need, right?
Yeah.
Because your body will tell you what you need. Your body needed play. Your body needed freedom.
Yes.
It's like, I have plenty of rigid, hard experiences. I need to know how to have joy.
Yes.
I need new, and that's how our brain processes. It has a library of experiences that it pulls from. And if all your books are misery and pain, that's all it can pull from, right? You need to create new ones, new experiences. And so this was different in that sense. Once we, started applying some of these things, we had to apply it to ourselves
Right.
first, because we want to know, like, can we do this ourselves, and hit some of like our own responses. And it it's it was just amazing what emerged. I mean, I wouldn't be a person to like go seek out therapy, right? It wasn't like my life was falling apart or I was having any flashbacks or nightmares. And yet I discovered so many things that I didn't know I carried, that I had experienced, that were driving behaviors, things, loops that I was getting stuck in that I never would have consciously connected to these earlier experiences. And that's kind of the key of like, oh my gosh, we're onto something. And then, working with the clients that I worked with, I think that, I would give just as much credit to them because
Mhm.
they were willing to explore some things with me that, I'm like, this is the theory behind it. This is what we learned. This is why we're going to try this. And they were willing, in this relationship to do that. And that's when I started seeing amazing transformations. And, CMI emerged, with our team. We had a development team. It's been refined, and now we're training other clinicians in it. But I'm telling you, that's kind of what has now become my passion,
Mhm.
of showing people you are more powerful than you think you are. The answers really are within yourself. You got to learn to trust yourself. Because let me tell you the worst part about trauma. There's horrific things that happen to people all the time, and people get past those horrific things. But the tragedy, the biggest tragedy, is when the person doesn't learn to trust themselves. Right? That lack of trust in the self. Why? Because now fear will always dictate and control, and you're in survival the rest of your life. That's not living, that's surviving. So helping the individual get past that part, learning to trust themselves again. And that has to come when a person is saying that to you through how they interact with you, through tuning into what your body is needing, what your mind is needing, and not what they think you need. That makes sense. So that it's kind of like a different approach in that sense.
I love that. That's so powerful. I mean, that's such a powerful message. And I'm just going to share some of my experience to accentuate, highlight, agree with
Yeah.
what you were saying. Is when I first started on my healing journey, I tried CBT. That was what the psychiatrist and the therapist that I was working with told me was going to work, and it made me want to peel my skin off. I couldn't do it. I felt like I was lying to myself. It was so uncomfortable for me. And so I couldn't continue that type of therapy. I had to find a therapist who was much more in line with bringing the mind and body together, allowing me to tap into self and my own self energy. And like you said, we do know internally what our body needs. We may have a whole lot of voices inside our head telling us we don't, or things, gaslighting us. We may be gaslighting ourselves. We may be, fear based, all of that you were talking about. And when we can quiet all that stuff down and tap into that sense of self and what our body wants, mine did not want CBT. Mine wanted play, like you were talking about. I
Yes.
needed to have that freedom and that fun because my childhood was so rigid and so structured and so not a childhood that
Yes.
it
Yes.
was too much. And so I want to talk a little bit more about when people don't have that sense of internal safety, that internal connection to self. How do you help them find that? Because that was one of the things I struggled with more than anything else, was trusting myself,
Yeah.
finding connection to self. How do you work with people to start to do that? Because that sounds like it's an incredibly powerful shift that you notice in your clients when you're working with them.
Yes. Well, and if you look at how humans develop,
Mhm.
right? When we're born, that's from birth to like age 1 or 2, that's when we start establishing this idea, this belief about whether the world is safe or not. And it's not a conscious thing that happens, right? It's your that's how you're wired. Your nervous system starts adjusting. Severely neglected babies will shut down and not cry because for to conserve energy.
Mhm.
These are experiences that lead to this development of these beliefs. That's why you're not going to just out talk it. You're not going to out compete it with trying to think differently, because it's wired in your nervous system, in your body, as part of like somatic memory, right?
Mhm.
In your body. And so knowing that means that, so I kind of start where the individual is. It's not about the age, right? So it's not about the age. It's about, have they even had an experience that tells their nervous system that there are safe people in this world? It's like if you have somebody who has never read, like I moved to Japan for a couple years and I did not know the language, much less the alphabet. I had to be taught by like 3-year-olds how to read, because I had to learn the alphabet first before I can put words together. It
Mhm.
didn't matter that I'm a grown woman. That's just where I was developmentally in that language. And it's the same thing with emotion, with safety. Some people have never experienced it. So you have to start where they are. So an individual like that, they have the ability to comprehend things at a cognitive level, intellectually, so we can normalize. Yeah, if your nervous system has never experienced that, it makes sense that it's hard for you to talk your way into that.
Mhm.
So it starts off with the therapist being attuned, meaning tuning in and recognizing, right now, Angie is, feeling stressed and might be just needing someone to tell her that she is, like, here, you can bring it and there's no judgment, right? Not say it verbally, but emotionally, with my presence, that you are okay just as you are. You are accepted just as you are. You are important and you matter just as you are. And that message has to be so clear, not through here, but in the feeling that you get in my presence. Right? And that is what's going to create the experience. The same as a healthy parent holds the baby, and the baby could have boy, my kids would like use just have those horrific accidents when it's like my last clean shirt.
Right.
Right? I'm like, this is, but you just love them anyway, right?
Mhm.
They don't have to earn your love. They don't have to earn anything. They're worthy just as they are. And those are the experiences you have to be able to have. So when you find a clinician, I mean, they talk about how relationship is the most important. That's what it's referring to. Because your nervous system can tell, even if I pretend and change my face
Mhm.
and try to tilt my head and be soft and gentle, your nervous system is reading my nervous system
Yep.
constantly underneath. And if there's any apprehension, if there's any judgment, it's a snitch nervous system. It'll let you know. You might not be able to like see it here, or pinpoint it, but something feels off, So it starts with those experiences.
That almost brought tears to my eyes, by the way. That brought up a lot of emotion for me. I'm all about transparency because so many of us, especially those of us who experience childhood trauma, don't know what safety is. And I didn't know what safety was, that safe connection, until I found a therapist who was able to provide that safe container for me to have my breakdown and all of that. So, um, what you're talking about is just so incredibly powerful. So for anybody listening, if you're out there and you're with a therapist and you're like, my guard's still up, things don't feel quite right, trust yourself. Find someone else. It doesn't mean
Yes,
there's anything
yes,
wrong. It means go find
yes,
someone where you feel like you can all of a sudden breathe in their presence.
yes, yes. That's where it all starts.
Is finding someone that you can have a relationship where you do feel, you might not feel safe, and I didn't feel safe with my therapist probably for a good 6 years that I was with her, but I felt safe enough to keep going back and to keep working through it. So definitely, if you're getting any sense of vibe out there, people listening, that whoever you're working with, you're not vibing with, find someone else. It's okay.
Yes,
Trust yourself.
yes. And when people ask me, like, credentials are good and all, but
Mhm.
I'm gonna tell you, when I worked with kids, I learned quickly. Like, even before I had credentials, you could have someone with a PhD, a PsyD, whatever, and if they didn't know how to connect, ooh, them kids would like sniff them out. And they knew. I'd seen, people get assaulted, and I'm like,
Yeah.
probably shouldn't have said it like that.
Yeah.
It you have to feel you have to feel like they honor your humanity, right? That there's a respect for your journey, and can see beneath all of everything that maybe you've done to survive, or not reduce your identity to your experiences, rather look beneath that at like your true self, what I call the core self, and be able to help you see yourself from that angle, right? Recognize yourself from that angle, get to know yourself from that angle. That's where it starts.
So powerful. That is amazing. So I'm going to ask you another question. We were talking a little bit before we started the recording, and you were talking about how when you help someone heal an experience, a traumatic event, and you kind of pull that piece out of their memory network, things collapse and fall apart.
Yeah.
Can you talk more into that? Because I think many of us who have been healing have experienced that. We're like, oh my God, I just made this huge progress. And then next day you're can't get out of bed,
Yes.
curled in the fetal position, or whatever your response is. Can you talk more to
Yeah. Absolutely. So there are people, I think a lot of people have heard the term neuroplasticity.
that? Mhm.
Neuroplasticity is like our brain's ability to change, and build new networks. But there's also the concept of neural rigidity, right? There has to be some kind of structure that holds us together, that gives us a sense of self, a sense of identity, because we need a reference point for how to be in the world, right? What to expect and what things mean. If that collapses, you can't exist without, like, you need some sense of identity, right? So our brain really connects, the memories are really stored in like little networks,
Mhm.
but for the sake of like simplicity, let's call them books, like stories, right? Because they contain everything in that. And we all have a library of experiences. That library contains everything that we've experienced even before we can remember things. And our brain has to, whenever we go through something, it uses that as the reference point to understand what's happening right now. So if I'm like, when I lived in Japan, my mom, she's Mexican as heck, man. Like, so if she asked me, like, what'd you make for dinner? And I'm like, okonomiyaki. And her little Mexican mind was like, does it have frijoles? Does it have a jalapeno? I'm like, no, mom, like, there's no frijoles, there's no jalapeno here. I'm in Japan. Like, she couldn't comprehend because she's never experienced that type of food. And she's really struggling to try to fit it into her understanding, right? That's
Mhm.
normal. That's how brains work. And so if you don't have, you can academically, intellectually grasp information. This is not the same as an experience, right? Someone who's read 1,000 books on surgery, I don't know that I would want them cutting me open
I
as
would
someone
not.
who's right, like you being in the medical field, right? You can learn all the stuff and memorize all the stuff, but until you're in it, until you experience it, there's something about that records differently,
Yes.
right? And so whenever we have this library that's full of trauma and betrayal and helplessness and hopelessness, and we're trying to do something like, oh, use positive self-talk, right? Your body's like bull crap, like that's it's not
Hell
going to take
no.
it,
Yes.
right? If you have something there that it can use as a reference point, like, oh, okay, I can see that, then it's going to be different. So if you have like a modality, let's say you come to a therapist and they're like, oh, we got to target this trauma because it's the thing that keeps flashing, right? And it that might be in CMI we call it a signal, and this signal, yes, maybe it was like a car accident, maybe it was something, that was distressing, but a lot of times it's not just about that. It's
Mhm.
something underneath that's connected to something else. Because that's how our networks are, right? Like it's the books are all in like all of those files of memory traces are like organized into categories and you never know what's connected to what.
Mhm.
But usually with complex trauma or like childhood adversity, everything's connected to helplessness, something like that. So if you come in and you're like, let's say I'm your therapist and I have an agenda and I'm like, oh, this is the problem, that's what we're going to target. Now, with the modality that I used before, yeah, sometimes that would help like desensitize, right? And now they don't have the flashback. There are some powerful modalities that can help with that. But you also have the other ones where it doesn't feel right inside and you can't articulate it, but it just feels forced. Right? And that might be something that's holding up all this other stuff about what you believe about yourself. And in that case, it's like you're pulling a bottom Jenga piece. You ever play the game Jenga that has all these blocks on top and you pull the bottom one and the whole thing collapses. And so what I would see sometimes with, using like the approach that I used to use is we target the thing that we thought was the problem. And it seemed to be better at the end of that session. But then the next day, it was this unexplainable anxiety or this other memory
Mhm.
emerged and came up that they weren't ready to confront, and there was so that's when I started questioning. I'm like, okay, there's a lot of evidence to this, but there's something else going on with people. And so like with CMI, what we're doing is helping therapists understand how to recognize like what the individual's capacity is for. So
Mm.
capacity for emotion, capacity for, we call it the fluency, right? Emotion fluency, sensation, cognition fluency, and then agency, how much they feel in control of their life, and then connectability. So we kind of focus on those three. So if you don't have, like I might have an individual with complex trauma that just gets angry,
Mhm.
right? They're fine or they're pissed off. Those are two things. There's not a lot of like
Middle ground.
fluency there. Middle
No.
ground. Yeah. So we got to work on that before we start like poking at memories that because it's only going to be one or the other, right? So we got to work on awareness. We got to work on, hey, you can be upset and you're not going to die. When you were a kid, it felt like you were going to die because there's all these other factors, but you're a grown up now. You have a lot more capacity, but they have to have that experience. We have to update those networks, update that library so that we can build new policies and procedures, for the nervous system as to how to respond to these things and then work up from there.
That is so powerful. So I'm going to extrapolate a message to share with the listeners. if you're going along and you feel like you've made progress and then all of a sudden you digress, that doesn't mean you've digressed. That means that you've tapped into part of your nervous system that you might not be ready to have tapped into yet, or you've healed one thing on your memory chain and now you're tapping into something else, and that's normal. And so
Yes.
taking some of the fear out of, oh my God, something's wrong, I've done something wrong, I just broke myself. Okay, that was my word in my head every time that happened to me.
Yeah.
um it's normal. It's a part of the healing process. And by normalizing it, that tends to take some of the fear, the heaviness, the weight of it away. And now we have this amazing therapist telling us, oh my gosh, there are other ways that you can work into that. And if it happens, we have ways to help you navigate that.
Yes. And I think, to build on that is be your own advocate.
Yes.
A good trauma-informed therapist is going to recognize you as the expert of your life. They're
Mhm.
going to acknowledge your expertise and they're going to work with you. They're going to support you. They're not going to dictate and tell you, no, you have to do it this way because this is what this says. They're going to stay curious with you. And that's how we get answers, is by staying curious, not making assumptions. Because the way you're like you said, you needed play, right?
Mhm.
Somebody else might need to talk about it. Someone else talking about it is going to make it worse and reinforce the story,
Yeah.
right? So there's no right way to do it. It's individual way to do it, right? That's the piece that's so important.
I love that. So powerful and so important to learn to trust yourself. And whether you experience complex trauma as a child or even trauma as an adult, car accidents, medical trauma, I see that a lot. By the way, I'm a nurse and you don't want me operating on you, even though I've been in the surgery room 100 times. That's where the
Yeah.
experience comes in. Um, well, I
Yeah.
sidetracked even myself. Um, yeah,
The trusting yourself,
oh,
yeah, getting to know
yeah.
yourself and trusting yourself, right? Because
Yes.
that's what I teach. Yeah. And then I tell people, like, it's at the beginning, we're a team, but I don't even know where it's going, right? I know that you're powerful enough to get there, though. 100% believe in you, because it's part of what being human is. We are resilient, but we all have different keys to that. And so it's my job to stay out of the way by staying curious and by helping you, right? And guiding, just kind of like being a compass. Hey, try that, maybe over here. No,
Mhm.
well, okay, let's go this
Okay.
way. Let's go this way. It's like we're navigating and we're finding the way, but also holding that space to saying, yeah, this is a natural part of the process. Sometimes you find the ways that aren't working well,
Mhm.
and you've got to feel like, if you can't communicate that with your therapist, and this is where some people who do like the appeasing, the people pleasing, and they're like, well, they're the expert. No, you're the expert.
Mhm.
Trust yourself. If something feels off, let them know something feels off. And if they're, trauma informed therapist is going to believe you, they're going to be curious with you. And we're going to find other things. Maybe we need to work on this before we go there. Maybe we need to approach it this way. But it is definitely, should be a collaborative effort, but you're going to discover so much about yourself. And, the beautiful thing, when I started using CMI with I get a lot of complex trauma, a lot of like pretty heavy, people who come and see me. And I remember a gentleman that said, number one, when he came in and said, I think I'm starting to like myself. And I thought, oh my God, that was so powerful,
Mhm.
because he had so much shame before. And the last day, when we finally like closed out and moved on, he got his dream job, all these, like, he just started having really a lot more control over his life, right? He said, what's weird? He said, I actually welcome flashbacks now.
Mm.
And I about fell out my chair. I'm like, can you repeat what you just said?
Right.
I think I know what you said, but what do you mean by that? And he said, well, because before, when he had a flashback, he had no agency, no control. It like siphoned him into that time and place, right? And it was terrifying. And he felt like it's like getting swept away by a flood.
I
And
describe it as a
now,
riptide. You get pulled out in a riptide.
yes,
Hmm.
yes, a riptide. And now he felt himself strong enough, clear enough, integrated enough, right? Where he had made sense of a lot of things, made connections, connected with himself, was loving himself, that this thing that came up was uncomfortable and it was ugly, but it didn't like it wasn't a riptide,
Yeah.
right? He could be curious about it, and he didn't need me no more after that.
Mhm.
So it's like you can explore things and don't have to be overcome by them. And that to me is powerful because now he's in a state where he can observe patterns, he can get curious, and if he finds something, he's like, "Oh, let me connect to that. Let me clear that up." And he just gains more wisdom, more understanding about how he interacts, about, why certain things feel a certain way, or he just gains more clarity. And that's the piece to me. Healing is about knowing yourself to such a level that you feel like you know what your response would be, that you feel in control of your response. That's when we're able to kind of create our own reality, our own life. That's living.
I absolutely. And I love that because when I started on my journey, I thought healing was an endpoint. I was going to be healed. I was never going to have problems again. I was going to be great. And you gave such a beautiful example that it's not. It's actually healing is being able to navigate those ups and downs and those pull out and the riptides and all of
Yes.
that with greater ease because you know who you are. You have that sense of self.
Yes. I say it's a journey, just like washing the dishes. If you've never washed dishes and you have a huge pile, you're going to need some help clearing out that kitchen. I'll come in and teach you how to wash and how to clean, and we get your kitchen sparkly. You're done, but you're never done with dishes, you know? And
Ever.
and the moments in between, it really depends. I mean, if you've got kids, forget it, you're never done. But, but now you know how to wash them. Things come up and you can take care of it and clear it up and enjoy your space again. Things will come up in life because life is full of adversity. But you trust yourself that you know how to handle that. You know how to digest it, how to process it, how to wash those dishes and get to the side where you get to enjoy life again. Like you don't miss those moments. A lot of people just sit there and they want to avoid it, avoid it, avoid it, and it just keeps piling up and it gets
Yeah.
worse. Right. But that really to me is that process of as things come, as hard as they are, I can get through it. I trust myself. I know how to navigate this and get to the other side.
Amazing. I love it. All right, Estefana, I have two questions for you that I ask all my guests.
Okay.
So, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change about your journey to get to where you are, if anything?
I wouldn't change anything. I mean, I've learned at every juncture, every struggle, you don't know your strength. And nobody wants to be strong. Nobody wants to
Right.
be like, people are, you're
Right.
so strong. You're like, shut up.
I
Just,
don't want to
yeah,
be.
nobody wants to hear that. But you truly don't understand that. Like when you really can see it through experience again,
Yep.
then what is there to stop you? As a kid, we don't choose our adversity, but especially those that have childhood trauma, when you overcome those things, when you start owning your journey, what is there to stop you? Nothing. You
Nothing.
become unstoppable. What's going to scare you? You've been there, done that. Yep, postcard. Like, done it. So you learn to speak your truth. You find your voice. I saw someone gave me a little art rock that says, "Be a voice, not an echo." Right?
Mm,
And I love that
yeah.
because a lot of us echo like our self-worth. It's echoes from our abusers. It's echoes from people who never really could see anybody else other than through their lens of anger and rage and hatred, right? Those are all echoes. Your voice is like your authentic self, your true self. And to me, that like finding that, it's a fight, it's a struggle, but when you get there, I would not change any of the challenges I've had to this point.
It's so powerful. I love that. I love that quote. That's amazing. So then I'm going to ask you kind of the opposite. If you and I could sit down and talk in 12 months, where would you want your journey to be that it's not now?
I hope that at that point, it's just people have learned how to experience fear,
Mm.
upset, sad, and get to the other side. I hope that so many more humans recognize how powerful they are and reclaim, their journey and who they choose to be in this world and not be like dampered down by the pain of their experiences. I hope that by then I could say, there's, other people who are sharing this that are like connecting and that are finding their voice and look back and say, yes, I see how, this reached out here or there or that. It's just that's what I'm hoping, that's what my mission is.
I love it. I got goosebumps on that one, by the way. That's amazing. So if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you? How do you work with people? All of that kind of stuff. Tell
Um,
everybody how to get in touch with
in
you.
terms of yeah, in terms of therapy, I practice at Lighthouse Psychiatry in Gilbert, Arizona. But if there are workshops that we have created for individuals that can kind of teach some of those concepts. We just launched that recently in Chandler, and would like to make that available also. So it's not just going to be me. I'm training other people to do that as well that are just as capable and on the same mission. And so if that's something that interests people, like to run a workshop for their organization, or, get friends together to do something on Zoom or something, contact Arise Alliance, info@arisealliance.org, and we'll figure out something.
Fantastic. We'll drop that link in the show notes. So if you and a group of your besties want to get together and have someone come teach you these principles, absolutely do it. Get your friends together, help build a world where all of us get to feel that connected, safe, empowered connection to ourselves. So
Yes.
absolutely. So we'll drop all of Estefana's links in the show notes. Get in touch with her, reach out, tap into her amazing wisdom and her love. I don't know if y'all can feel it if you're not watching it, but she just has this calming, comfortable, safe space energy about her. So if you're looking for someone, definitely reach out. For those of you that are watching the video, she's amazing and has this incredibly safe energy that I'm feeling from her. So reach out, connect with her. And then also in the show notes, I have a free, short, less than 5 minute movement sequence that you can do when your nervous system feels like it's amped up, when you're really running on those high adrenaline, high anxiety, all of that kind of stuff. It'll help shift your mood instantly, bring you back to a state of calm so you can come back to your conscious brain and start to navigate whatever's coming up for you in the moment. So grab that. It's down in the show notes as well. And then until next time, I hope y'all have an amazing week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.